Rabbi Leib says this week that we learn a tremendous lesson about the power of speech. And this obviously comes from the verse that we were just learning. I want to actually share it with you. The verse is in Genesis chapter 37, verse 2. As you can see on your screen, it says, Ele Toledot Yaakov. These are the offspring of Yaakov, and obviously his most favorite, the most important offspring is Yosef, Joseph, who was 17 years old, and he was Haya ro'eh techav batzon. He was a shepherd with his brothers, and Vehunar, he was a young lad, and he would spend most of his time with the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, and he would Vayave Yosef et dibatam ra'a el avihem. He would bring the evil tales about his brothers to his father. So on that, Rabbi Leib tells us the very famous Rashi that he came and he told his father the three negative things that they committed. We'll repeat them. The first is that they would eat a limb from a live animal before slaughtering it or without slaughtering it, that the brothers would mistreat the children of the slaves, and that they would be committing adultery and types of promiscuity. So Leib says that there are multiple consequences to the fact that Joseph spoke negatively about his brothers, and there are many lessons to learn from it as well. So before he gets into learning he actually brings 4 beautiful lessons. But before we get into those lessons, he asks a question, and he says, we need to understand why Joseph, who was only 17 years old, is punished so severely for speaking negatively about his brothers. Okay, he's over bar mitzvah, but he's only 17 years old. I mean, who can say that they were completely perfect and mature at 17 years old, that they didn't make a mistake of the slip of their tongue? So why is Joseph being judged so stringently? Asked Reb Leib. So he gives 2 answers. Listen to his first answer. His first answer reiterates the idea that Jacob loved Joseph the most. It's obvious, we understand why. He was the first son of his most favorite and precious wife, Rachel. Jacob put extra efforts into raising him, teaching him Torah, passing on all the wisdom that he's had in his entire life into this child, into Joseph. The past 17 years have been an intense educational experience for Joseph. Jacob was actually preparing, and he planned for Joseph to be great and to rule as the king and even Kohen, priest, over the entire Jewish nation. He made him, Reb Leib says, Jacob makes Joseph a ketonet pasim, a beautiful, colorful garment, which was a sign of the great privilege and status that Joseph had over his brothers. Number 1, Reb Leib says, as a Kohen, as a priest, as Aaron's apron was called a ketonet tashbetz. Like we just said, ketonet pasim. Ketonet means apron or jacket. So he was clothed with that as a sign that he is going to be, now from him and on, it's going to be the Cohen dynasty is going to come from Joseph. And also as king, which is a sign of royalty, which also we find the terminology of ketonet, that the family of King David, specifically Tamar, the daughter of David, would also wear a ketonet. So we see that Jacob is preparing Joseph to rule as king and to act as Cohen, and Joseph was destined to literally be the leader over his brothers and family, and he was, Reb Leib says, held to a higher standard because of this. And the fact that he was coming with these reports of the shortcomings of his brothers, that now was Joseph demonstrating that he lacked in a very important capacity as a leader. And as a leader / ruler, that person's not supposed to be reporting or pondering upon the shortcomings of their constituents. On the contrary, we learn by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Moses, that a leader and a ruler is supposed to battle for his people, as Moshe Rabbeinu battled time and time again for Bnei Israel with Hashem, to no end. And this is something that Joseph was, so this is Reb Leib's first answer, Joseph was prepared for all this greatness and rulership and priesthood, but he demonstrated a lack of leadership through reporting these shortcomings, and instead of standing up and trying to help them with them, that's why he was judged stringently. So because of all the potential that he had, and that's why he lost it. The second answer, Leib says, why Joseph was judged so stringently is that he was the son of Rachel. So why is that held against him? Because Rachel literally, what's the word I'm looking for? She epitomized the idea, or the trait rather, of silence. She did so when she gave her sister Leah the signs that her and Jacob made together, and she was standing there at the chuppah when Leah was standing next to Jacob. And she knew what was going on, and she was completely silent in order not to embarrass her sister. The fact that she was so great in the area of silence as the son of Rachel, Joseph, was also held to a high expectation, and that he should have followed his mother's footsteps, been more careful, and weighed every single word that he used. And the fact that Joseph, at least in the eyes of Hashem, should have been more careful as order not to say things negatively about his brothers, he therefore was punished at a very, very high level and a very, very stringent way. So that's two answers Reb Leib gives on why Joseph was judged stringently. One is because, again, he was prepared for all this greatness, and then he showed a lack of leadership by bringing the shortcomings in front. The second answer he gave is that because he was a child of Rachel who excelled tremendously in the trait of silence, he should have and could have excelled there too, and he didn't. So now Reb Leib goes through four consequences and their reasons for what Joseph was punished by because he spoke negatively about his brothers. Okay? The first is that Joseph, by speaking slanderous about his brothers, was liable for capital punishment and exile, which seems very, very severe. Now, Reb Leib explains that in the eyes of the Torah, the way the Torah depicts this scenario is that the tribes themselves, Joseph's brothers, held, according to Jewish law, that Joseph was obligated to be killed because of his actions, because of him going against his brothers, because of him speaking Lashon Hara against them. What they did was they convened a bet din, a court of law, and they tried their brother, and their brother was proven guilty. What they did was they threw him in a pit of snakes and scorpions, which are obviously, they didn't throw them there to cool down or to get out of the shade. I mean, they threw him down there to die. And then, miraculously, Judah convinces the brothers, there's no point of soiling our hands with his blood. Let's sell him. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites coming by. So what did they do? They changed his punishment of death, of being put to death, capital punishment, for being guilty, to exile, which is a fair replacement to capital punishment, as we see earlier on in Genesis that God did a similar thing to another biblical character. Not one that I would like to associate with Joseph per se, but Cain, who murdered his brother Hevel. Instead of God killing him or murdering him for murdering his brother, which is really what the law should be, he sent Cain into exile. So this is what Joseph was punished with. Joseph was really obligated with capital punishment, But then he was sent out into exile away from his family. So that's the first punishment and reason. Second punishment and reason is that he went into slavery. Now, he went into slavery for speaking inappropriately about his brothers. That again sounds quite severe. So he says as follows, and now this is a beautiful concept. He says, Leib teaches us that the main difference and advantage that human beings have over all other creations is the ability to communicate, specifically the ability to speak. The fact that we're able to speak is something which makes us a cut above the rest, literally. And this gift was given to us because we were created in the image of God. We were created b'tselem Elokim. And the fact that we have this tselem Elokim, this image of God in us, is the ability that we have. The power of speech that we have is a result that we're created in the image of God. Because again, speech creates. We're able to create conversations and realities through communication. And that's what God is. God is a creator. And we are many creators. Leib says, he proves from the Talmud, that in general, every vessel or utensil has a specific and probably even an optimal way to use that vessel. Meaning a drill is used to either drill screws in or out or to drill holes, but a drill should not be used as a hammer. That's not the optimal way for it to be used. Now, the greatest way to use our mouths, says Leib, based on the Talmud, is silence, is keeping quiet. The greatest way to use that tool, to use the tool of one's mouth, is by not using it. It's kind of like a firearm. I don't want to get into a debate. Are we pro-firearms? Are we anti-firearms? That doesn't matter at this point. But we agree that the best way to use a firearm is by not using it. It's there as a last resort. So too, are you with me? Yeah, okay, sorry. So too are our mouths, explains Leib. Our mouth's greatest way to be used is by keeping silent and not using it. Except for using it for Torah and mitzvot. Learning Torah, teaching Torah, and fulfilling mitzvot. That's the only way to use our mouths in a better way than silence. So Leib says guarding one's speech is a priority that finds itself at the top of the list of priorities, literally. And the severity of soiling and ruining one's speech stems from the destruction of the tselem Elokim, the divine image that we have inside of each and every one of us that we were created with. When we misuse our mouths, when we misuse our speech, we are misusing and destructing the image of us. So now let's connect it. Leib says, one who doesn't guard their tongue is acting irresponsible. They're acting irresponsible with the gift of humanity, of speech, of can't control themselves when it comes to speech in a proper manner, must now be subservient to another master, explains Leib. So Joseph now, he made a big boo-boo. He started speaking negatively about his brothers to his father. He now was misusing the power of freedom and speech that he had. Therefore, he had to go into slavery. It's a fascinating concept. Did you get it? I see you guys. Yes. Okay, good. Third punishment and reason was that Joseph lost the kingship and priesthood. Now, I learned with Reb Meir Safra this week again, the rabbi's son-in-law, Rabbi Israel Meir Safra, sorry, and he told me when we were learning this piece that this is literally a novelty that Reb Leib put together. To many of us, it may seem quite simple, but we may take this for granted after I say this, based on what Reb Leib says. Reb Leib says that originally, the leader, the ruler, the firstborn was supposed to be Reuven. At the end of the day, Reuven was the firstborn. And that came with the responsibility. After Rachel passes away and Reuven sins by moving his father's bed from Rachel's tent that was brought into Bilhah into Leah, his mother's tent, we spoke about that 2 weeks ago, he now lost his birthright, so to say, and his rulership and priesthood responsibilities. And they were given to Joseph, because then Joseph was the firstborn of the second real wife, which was Rachel, opposed to the maidservants' wives. So Joseph was supposed to be, through him, the king and the Kohen and the priest. When Joseph sinned, those responsibilities were taken away from him and divided. They would be divided between Judah and Levi, Judah being the kingship and Levi the priesthood. And this was all because Joseph would magnify the faults of his brothers, and that again served as a deficiency in his role as a leader. So that's his third punishment. His third punishment was that he lost the kingship and the priesthood. Last but not least punishment that Joseph received for speaking about his brothers in a negative way was that slander was also spoken about him, which was an act of measure that God was showing him, that his master's wife slandered him and had him thrown into jail for, at the end of the day, a total of 12 years. So I just want to reiterate what Reb Leib is saying. Reb Leib is saying that the fact that Joseph spoke inappropriate was so severe that he deserved, because again, he was judged on a higher level, but he deserved these 4 severe consequences. And the first one was that he really deserved capital punishment, that was transferred into exile. The second is that slavery, he deserved that because he was misusing his speech and the fact of his freedom. Then he lost the kingship and the priesthood as well. And the third is that slander was spoken about him also. So this is ending Reb Leib's novelty, and now I want to share a lesson on my end on this topic. That, let's face it, Joseph was 17 when all these mistakes were taking place, and on one hand we say, hey, we got to cut him some slack. On the other hand, he, as we explained, was judged in a very severe way. But after all the mistakes Joseph made in his youth, he really went to Egypt and he turned his life around. And I think that's what's most remarkable, that he was able to change and realize that he may have made a mistake. He may have been looking at his whole life and his brothers and his relationships all wrong. And he went to Egypt and he became a greater person. He became a person who knew when to speak and knew when not to speak. And this eventually led him to be the cause, through God, obviously, and Joseph knew this, that saved the entire region to survive the greatest famine they've ever seen, single-handedly. So how can I prove to you that he started thinking more about how he speaks and what he says? So, a very interesting thing to say is the Torah tells us, and the Torah tells us, let's put it this way, that Joseph was an ish matzliach. He was very, very successful in Egypt. Now, the commentaries explain to us, the Midrash and many more, tell us that Joseph's master would ask Joseph, Potiphar would ask him, to bring him some water. He had poured out of a flask. And then he said, no, I want coffee out of the same flask. Cold water and then hot coffee. And then he said, no, I want beer. No, I want wine, vodka. I don't know what they drink. I don't know what Egyptians drink. Arak. All from the same flask without leaving. Just right, like a wonder flask, nonstop. Boom, boom, boom. And Potiphar would think, what is this type of sorcery? And he would look at Joseph and he'd see Joseph murmuring words. He said, Joseph's just a grand sorcerer. There's nothing special about him. He just knows how to manipulate the nature in this world. Our Mefarshim tell us, Joseph was not doing that. Joseph had Shem, I'm going to say it in Hebrew first, he had Shem Shamaim Shagur Alpiv. He had the name of God consistently on the tip of his tongue and on his lips. He would always be speaking to God, praying to God, non-stop. He said, in the name of God, please Hashem, help me to fulfill this, and help me to do this, and help me to be successful in this, and to succeed in this. Non-stop, non-stop. I want to take from that novelty, from that Ma'amar Chazal, from that interpretation of our sages, that is a proof that when Joseph comes to Egypt, he decides to rethink his whole life, and he turns it all around and says, not only am I going to not speak negatively about anyone I see or encounter, I'm going to be constantly connected to God and speaking to God and blessing God and praising God. Like the old trick goes that if you want to stay out of trouble, keep busy with good things. That's what Joseph kept his mouth busy with. He was always saying and speaking good things, and that kept him out of misusing his mouth to saying any slanderous speech at all. So again, that's a tremendous lesson for us. On our end, we should try to learn from Joseph, not wait for any severe punishment, God forbid, when it comes to misusing our speech. And we should really, really try to realize what speaking negatively can do. Destroys relationships, friendships, businesses, communities, in every single way. And we should really cherish this great gift that God gave us of speech, and rather than using it in a negative way, or even one trick of holding back from using it in a negative way is to actively use it in a good way. And remember the saying that the Talmud says, the importance of silence. The Talmud says, if one good word is worth one coin, well, then silence is worth two. To reiterate the importance of silence and how being silent is the greatest way to use the tool of our mouths and the gift of our speech. So with that, I thank everyone for joining us. And may the words of the Zeh Shimshon and Reb Leib please be a great, tremendous merit to us all. And at this time, I will allow anyone to unmute themselves if they have any questions on tonight's class. Thank you, everyone.
Rabbi, I have a little question. When the cupbearer, Joseph told him, please, when you go to the Pharaoh, please put in a good word for me. So I forgot which Racham said, I think it was Rashi, I'm not sure. He said, because...
Yes, it's the end of this week's Torah portion.
Yes. Because he spoke, he should not have spoken. He should have trusted God. So because of that, an extra 2 years for you. Meanwhile, I see it. I don't know if anybody else sees it this way. I don't see it as a punishment. I see it that maybe Hazid, this guy, he's seeing that God is with him, and he says, you know what? God is putting these words in my mouth, and that's what I'm going to say because I feel that I have to say. But he's being treated not so good by the rabbis on this one.
No, so that not so good by the rabbis. Listen, they gave that interpretation again in the same light and in the same vein that Joseph was judged stringently because of his great and high level.
Yeah, no point, but I don't know. I don't follow that one. Anybody else doesn't follow that one, or it's just me?
I hear you on that. We're not supposed to be relying on a miracle, so it's almost like, we're not supposed to, like, he's trying to rely on a miracle. Why not do your hishtadlus and make an effort and just kind of like, be your own advocate, and Hashem is going to help you with that. I get what he's saying.
100%. But we do realize, so in our lives, for us, 100%. But we have to realize that the patriarchs, and Joseph included, they were not ordinary men. They were prophets in their own right, so they are expected to act on a different high level. That's the only thing I could say. It's the difference between them and us.
Hey, look at your chat.
No, she's off.
No, I see it. I would like to welcome Reb Leib's sister, baby sister, Hannah, Mrs. Hannah Breukman, is on with us.
I'd like to say something. She doesn't know how to speak up. She just called me.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to teach her. But she said to me she remembers her brother used to always say, zip it. When you want to speak, zip it. Those are the two words she just clearly remembers him always saying. Zip it, zip it, zip it. So she just shared that with me. So I would like to share that with the group.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's all take that lesson to heart and zip it.
Zip it.
When
Uncle Leib. It's a good note.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great Shabbat. I'm letting class out early 5 minutes tonight, so I'm making up for the other times.
It was beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Gray.
Chag Sameach to everybody.
Yes, Chag Sameach.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
A pleasure. A pleasure. It was great.
Okay, we'll see everyone next week.
Bye-bye.
And Hannah figured out how to use it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, okay. I see you and Ron, but I don't know.